Hello and welcome. Tonight, we settle into a quiet evening, the kind when the world outside has softened into shadows and the faint hum of distant streets drifts gently by. Somewhere across the way, a single window glows softly, lingering long after the rest have gone dark. It catches the eye, almost without meaning to, and invites a gentle wondering what quiet stories might be unfolding behind that steady light in the calm of the night. It was already late when Daniel began moving through his usual end-of-evening habits, the ones that no longer required much thought. The apartment was quiet in the way it often became after 10, when the outside world seemed to step back just enough to let the night settle in. He rinsed a mug at the sink, listening to the water run a moment longer than necessary, then set it upside down on the towel to dry. The room held a comfortable half-light. One lamp was still on, its glow soft against the walls, leaving the corners calm and unhurried. Outside, the street had thinned to the occasional passing car, its sound muted and brief, like a thought that never fully formed. As Daniel reached to switch off the lamp near the window, he paused, not because of anything unusual, really, but because his eyes drifted, as they often did, to the building across the way. Most of its windows were already dark, each one quietly signaling the end of another day, all except one. That window was still lit, not brightly and not in any way that demanded attention, just a steady, warm square of light resting there as if it belonged to the night itself. It wasn't new. Daniel had seen it before, more times than he could count, always lingering after midnight when the rest of the block had gone to sleep. He stood there for a moment longer, one hand still near the lamp switch, noticing the gentle contrast between his dim room and that distant glow. The curtain behind the window barely moved, and there was no sound to suggest activity, just the light, patient and quiet. It didn't make him wonder in any urgent way, it simply felt like something to notice, like a familiar detail that returned each night, asking nothing, offering a small sense of company. Daniel turned off his lamp at last, leaving the room in shadow, while the window across the way continued to shine softly, keeping its place in the darkness as the evening moved on. Outside, the neighborhood had settled into its nighttime rhythm, the kind that arrived quietly without anyone noticing the exact moment it began. The street below Daniel's window carried only soft sounds now. A car passed now and then, its tires brushing over the pavement and fading quickly into the distance. Somewhere far off, a door closed with a gentle thud, followed by the calm hush that returned almost immediately. Inside, the apartment felt comfortably held, as though the walls themselves had grown quieter along with the hour. The air was still, carrying the faint warmth left behind from the day. Daniel moved slowly, unhurried, aware of how each small sound belonged to him alone. The soft scrape of a chair leg as he pulled it back in, the low click of a switch as he turned on the kitchen light. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove, listening as the metal met the burner with a familiar weight. While he waited, he leaned against the counter and looked out the window again. The glowing window across the way was still there, unchanged. It didn't seem brighter or dimmer, just steady, as if time passed around it without asking anything in return. When the kettle began its quiet warming, Daniel adjusted the lamp near the sofa, turning it slightly so the light fell more evenly across the room. The shadows softened, edges blurring into one another. Outside, the glowing window remained, a fixed point in the gentle darkness, noticed again without effort as the evening continued to unfold. Daniel let the kettle finish in its own time, then poured the water slowly into his favorite mug, the one with a small chip along the rim that his thumb always seemed to find. Steam rose gently, fogging the air for a moment before disappearing. He stood there and took a careful sip, waiting for the heat to settle into something comfortable. When he was done, he rinsed the mug and set it back in its place, the soft clink against the shelf sounding quieter than it did during the day. He straightened the chair near the table, nudging it just enough so it lined up the way he liked. These were small movements, familiar ones, and they carried a quiet satisfaction. As he moved through the room, his eyes returned now and then to the window across the way. The light was still there, unchanged, steady in its glow. It didn't flicker or shift, it simply remained, as constant as the rhythm of his own steps across the floor. Daniel brushed his hands together and headed toward the bedroom, pausing to smooth the blanket at the foot of the bed. The fabric felt cool and reassuring beneath his fingers. Once more, almost without thinking, he glanced outside. The glowing window seemed to keep time with him, present and unassuming as the night gently carried him toward rest. At some point, Daniel realized he'd been noticing that window for a long time. Not just tonight, but on many other nights when the hours slipped quietly past midnight and the world outside had thinned to almost nothing. The memory came to him easily, without effort, like remembering a familiar face without recalling the first time you met. There was no real question attached to it, no need to know who was awake behind that glass or what kept them company in the late hours. The lights simply existed, night after night, steady in a way that felt natural, as if some lights were meant to stay on when others rested. Daniel leaned lightly against the doorframe, listening to the soft hum of the apartment. The refrigerator clicked on somewhere behind him, then settled again. Outside, the glowing window held its place, quietly unchanged. He wondered, gently, about the many small reasons someone might still be awake. Reading a few more pages, sitting with a cup that had gone cold, letting thoughts drift without direction. None of it felt unusual. In the quiet of the night, wakefulness seemed almost ordinary. After a while, Daniel turned away from the window, carrying that calm wondering with him. It followed like a soft background thought, present but uninsistent, as the night continued to move forward at its own easy pace. Later, as the night grew quieter still, Daniel found himself looking out the window once more. This time, there was a small change, easy to miss if he hadn't already been paying gentle attention. A faint shadow moved behind the curtain across the way, passing through the warm light and then disappearing again. It wasn't sudden or startling, just a brief suggestion of movement, like someone crossing a room without hurrying. The light dimmed for a moment, as though a lamp had been adjusted or something had passed close in front of it. Then it returned to its steady glow. Daniel watched without leaning forward, without trying to see more than was offered. These small signs felt ordinary and reassuring, proof of quiet life continuing on its own schedule, much like his own evening unfolding one simple moment at a time. The apartment around him remained still. The clock ticked softly, marking time without insistence. Outside, the glowing window settled back into its calm presence, holding the light gently as the night carried on, inviting nothing more than a quiet sense of shared wakefulness. Standing there in the quiet, Daniel began to think about how many people remained awake at this hour, scattered across the city, each for their own gentle reasons. Some might be reading by a small lamp, turning pages slowly. Others could be sitting with their thoughts, letting the day loosen its hold. A few might still be working, not in a rush, just moving carefully through whatever needed finishing. The idea felt comforting rather than lonely. Wakefulness at night seemed softer, less demanding than during the day. There was room to pause, to breathe, to exist without explanation. The glowing window across the way fit easily into that thought, like a quiet nod between strangers who would never meet. Daniel rested his hand on the cool glass of his own window for a moment. Inside his apartment, everything was settled and familiar. Outside, the light remained, steady and patient, suggesting someone else was passing the night in their own calm way. He didn't imagine a story for them or try to place a face behind the curtain. It was enough to know that in this wide stretch of darkness, a few lights were still on, enough to feel that being awake didn't have to mean being alone, as the night continued to hold its quiet shape. Watching the light across the way, Daniel felt a quiet recognition settle in. He had been that light before, more times than he could easily remember. Evenings when sleep arrived late and he moved gently through his own rooms, careful not to make noise, careful not to wake anyone else. He remembered sitting at a small table with only one lamp on, the rest of the space left in shadow. The sound of pages turning slowly, the habit of placing each cup down with care, the way the night seemed to listen more closely than the day ever did. Those memories carried a soft warmth with them. They made the glowing window feel familiar, almost friendly, without needing any connection beyond that shared experience, just the understanding of what it meant to be awake while the world rested. Daniel shifted his weight and let the thoughts settle. The night around them remained calm and steady. Somewhere across the way, someone else was likely moving just as quietly, following their own gentle routine as the hours continued to pass without hurry. After a while, the wondering seemed to settle on its own. Daniel didn't feel the need to look again for signs or changes. A simple understanding had taken shape, quiet and complete. Whoever lived behind that window was likely awake for reasons that needed no explanation. Maybe they were reading, pausing now and then to rest their eyes. Maybe they were caring for something small and delicate, or finishing a task that felt easier to do at night. Or perhaps they were simply sitting in the stillness, enjoying the rare calm that only late hours could offer. The thought felt right as it was, ordinary, comforting. Nights were full of these small, unseen lives unfolding gently, without announcement or urgency. Daniel let his shoulders relax as the idea settled. The light across the way continued to glow, steady and unremarkable, no longer a question to consider, but a quiet presence to accept as the night moved on in its unhurried way. As the hour grew later, Daniel began the final steps of getting ready for sleep. He turned off the last lamp in the living room, leaving the space in a gentle darkness that felt familiar and welcoming. The apartment held the quiet easily, as though it had been waiting for it. Before pulling the curtains in his bedroom, he looked out once more. The window across the way had changed. The light was softer now, dimmed to a faint glow, and then, almost without notice, it slipped away. A curtain moved, slow and unhurried, until the window matched the rest of the building in shadow. The moment didn't stand out. It felt natural, like the final page of a book being turned without ceremony. Just another small signal that the night was settling into itself. Daniel drew his own curtains and eased into bed, the room dark and calm around him. Outside, the street remained still, and inside, everything felt complete as the night continued quietly toward rest. Daniel eased beneath the covers, feeling the familiar weight of the blanket settle over him. The room was dark and calm, the quiet carrying a sense of ease that made each breath a little slower, a little deeper. Outside, the street remained still, and inside, the soft rhythm of the apartment whispered that everything was as it should be. He thought briefly of the window across the way, now dark like the rest. Its absence was not empty or lonely. It felt peaceful, like a gentle signal that the world, even when unseen, continued to move quietly and kindly at its own pace. Daniel let himself sink fully into the mattress, letting the steady hush of the night surround him. There was reassurance in knowing that somewhere nearby, other lives were following their own gentle routines, awake or asleep, moving softly through hours meant for reflection and rest. The stillness felt complete, carrying him toward a slow, untroubled sleep. As Daniel lay quietly, his thoughts softened into a gentle calm. The window that had once glowed so steadily now rested in darkness, yet its presence lingered in his mind, not as a question, not as a puzzle, but as a quiet companion of the night. It reminded him that small signs of life, even the simplest ones, carry comfort without needing words. A lamp left on, a shadow passing softly, a cup set down with care. These moments quietly tell us that the world continues, gently and kindly, even when we are not part of it. The stillness around him felt full rather than empty. The darkness held life in its own slow rhythm, inviting rest and ease. Daniel let himself breathe with it, letting the calm wash over him, carrying him deeper into the softness of the night, where quiet lives move softly and the world feels safely shared. And so, the night continues quietly, wishing you a peaceful rest whenever sleep arrives.